problem on the nutritional supplement side is there aren't any patents. You can't patent calcium. You can't patent echinacea. And without patents, the willingness to do a lot of studies is going to be lower. And the FDA is prohibited from limiting what you do and say. I mean, you can say this will improve heart health, and you don't have to have any data really to support that.
Focus on the energy pillar with Dr. Bobby Dubois. How are you doing, Bobby?
I'm feeling wonderful.
I'm excited about this discussion because this morning I took my athletic greens, and then a few hours later I use a protein powder because I'm really focused on protein. And in the past I've taken vitamin D. I've bought a fair amount of supplements, and we're going to talk about nutritional supplements and how do we incorporate those into our energy protocols. So why are supplements such an important topic?
Well, I think they're a really important topic. I mean, you're not alone. 50% of Americans take at least one supplement on a routine basis. So, you're among many, many others. And there's about $50 billion spent by Americans on supplements. That alone suggests that it's a good topic to talk about. Now, one of the caveats is that these can be very profitable for retailers. So it's one of those buyer beware. They're going to advertise. They're going to push the limits of what's feasible to advertise, and they're going to make a lot of money. That's the challenge to keep in our back of our mind. Now, the pitch for a supplement is really compelling, and I understand that. Folks, when it comes to their health, want to be proactive. They want to feel like they have agency. They're in charge. It isn't just God's will whether they get cancer. That's a scary proposition. So to feel like I'm doing something, it's going to make a difference, is a really compelling story. And I totally understand that. Now, the problem, of course, is that the enthusiasm outweighs the evidence, that there's a lot of excitement about athletic greens or any of these other things, but the evidence is pretty darn scanty and not particularly supportive. So that's the challenge that we need to wrestle with today. Now, the good news is, by and large, most of these are pretty safe. They're not going to hurt you. They may hurt your pocketbook, but they're not going to hurt you by and large. I mean, there are some weird ones that can hurt you. You can take too much of certain things. So the problem from my standpoint is that I tend to focus not on what is just safe, but whether it actually works or not. And that's where the evidence gets pretty scanty. And before we get any further, there's got to be a couple of disclaimers. First, I am not a nutritionist. I don't even play one on TV. I'm pretty good at looking at evidence to see what does and doesn't work, but I have no formal training other than being a physician about, the things that we eat and how they work in our bodies. The second is I have a personal bias, which is if there isn't evidence to support doing something, I generally don't do it. I don't do things in medicine because it seems hypothetically to be a good thing. I'm pretty skeptical until I run across evidence that says, this works in these kinds of people. And that applies to pharmaceutical prescribed drugs and especially to supplements.
I have a question on that. How do you navigate the world when a lot of evidence is indicative but not directly causal in most instances?
That would be a wonderful podcast all in itself. Related to what we're going to talk about, there's a lot of people who are anti-carbohydrates and the insulin effect and all the rest. And the problem with a lot of those studies is a lot is based on some biochemistry. Well, when you have sugar, this is what happens to your blood, and that can't be good, and it must cause long-term problems. It's that piece of connecting what they observe in the blood or in the lab or in a mouse, connecting that dot or those dots to what happens in humans is where things fall apart. And that's where nutritional supplements fall a lot on this, but so do a lot of other things that people claim we should do.
Okay, so how do we want to explore this topic?
I think, like you always do, set up a framework. So we're going to set up a framework. The first is we have to define terms. What are supplements and what are the most commonly used ones? Second, I think we want to have a brief discussion around the supplement industry and how it's quite different from the pharmaceutical industry and why the levels of evidence that we run across are so different. Third, we want to talk about a few of the most common supplements, and I'll share what I think we know and what we don't know. And ultimately, this comes down to a benefit, risk, and cost decision. And each person will have to make their own. In medicine, you have the Hippocratic Oath, do no wrong. But other people are like, well, it might help. It probably wouldn't do much wrong. Yeah, it'll cost me some money. I like the idea of taking supplements. I'll do it. And that's fine if that's where you net out. I net out differently because if there isn't evidence, I don't want to spend the money, take the effort to do it, and have the false belief that it will help solve problems that it probably won't.
So when I think of the word supplement, I think of it's supplementing something that we should have a certain amount of, and we don't, either because of nutrition or personal biochemistry or whatever. What are supplements in your mind? Or the common ones?
I think it's a great way to think about it. Now, these are referred to as nutritional supplements, and that'll be important in a few minutes when we talk about what the FDA can and can't do in this space. They fall pretty much into kind of four categories: vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E; minerals, calcium or magnesium; herbals, echinacea, turmeric, and a variety of others; and various probiotics that you might get in your yogurt, or you might take a packet and add it to things. These are typically taken on a routine basis. They can be taken for specific needs, but where you generally hear about it is you should take this every day. Now, the most common ones that people spend money on and take are multivitamins, your one-a-day type vitamin, omega-3s, probiotics, vitamin D, calcium, protein powder, and psyllium, which is like Metamucil. Those are the most common. Obviously, there's a whole raft of others, but that's the most common.
And so that's what we're talking about. Now, do we want to talk about the industry and how it's a little bit different?
I think so, because when you go to a doctor and the doctor says, I think you need to take valsartan for your blood pressure, the FDA is very involved in both approving the study you want to do, making sure that the data are analyzed correctly, that it's a sufficient size that it can prove something, that there's real safety that's been assessed, and that it actually works. All of that is tightly examined by the FDA. And before you put anything in your advertising or your label, they have to sign off on it. So it's a very closely scrutinized industry. Not that, every drug works for every person, and maybe there's some people that take certain drugs that probably really won't help them. But to be on the label, to be in the advertising, there's very close oversight.
When we think of some of the instances with the FDA, we've seen where things have turned out to hurt people in certain ways or become addictive in certain ways, even with all that oversight.
That's exactly
And now
right.
we switch to the supplemental industry.
Yep. Now, before we immediately turn, there's one other piece of the puzzle. The studies that the pharmaceutical industry does are ridiculously expensive. It's estimated to cost between $1 billion and $5 billion to bring a single drug to market. And you get a patent for a certain number of years. Nobody can compete with that molecule. So a lot of costs go in to do these fancy studies, but you have the potential for real gain. The problem on the nutritional supplement side is there aren't any patents. You can't patent calcium. You can't patent echinacea. And without patents, the willingness to do a lot of studies is going to be lower. And the FDA is prohibited from limiting what you do and say. I mean, you can say this will improve heart health, and you don't have to have any data really to support that. And so because you can pretty much say what you want, because it's a nutritional aid, it's like saying broccoli's good for you. Nobody's going to say that the Broccoli Growers Association can't tell you in their ads, eat broccoli, it's good for you, and it'll make you healthy and live longer. Because it's a supplement, it fits into that same category. And it's a very high profit industry. So there's an incentive to kind of push things further than what the data would support. And when we get into a study that's an example of one of these nutritional aids, you'll get a sense of why this can be problematic.
Well, it makes me think back when I was doing longer distance triathlon. I was taking a lot of nutritional supplements from a marketer for endurance athletes, and I would get all of these newsletters with all of these scientific articles about why this supplement's important and what that supplement does. And they had letters behind their name and words that were very long. And I had no clue what they were saying. I just said, okay, I'll try it. At least it can't hurt me. It can get very confusing on our end or the consumer end.
Oh, totally. Totally. I don't malign anybody for getting excited about certain supplements, and especially since that the agency thing really makes us feel good. Doing an endurance event is a painful exercise. And if you think, placebo or otherwise, that, a gel that has protein in it is better than a gel without protein or a drink with protein, hey, if it makes you feel better longer, great. But let me give you an example of a study, and it falls very much into what you just said. So basically, the point of the study and kind of the headline is broccoli sprout extract improves exercise performance. That sounds good. I have broccoli, but boy, if I can supercharge my broccoli with an extract, even better. And the theory makes some sense because broccoli has antioxidants, which everybody feels is bad for you. You have free radicals that are destroying your tissues, and an antioxidant will stop that. So that's, of course, got to be good. And the study was done, and they showed statistical improvements in heart rate as people were kind of pushing themselves, and the time to exhaustion. Like, how long can you do this before you basically say, I'm done? And it's like they show differences. Oh my God.
So we have a claim and we have a study that showed improvement.
Exactly. And they have big words and they had, letters after their names and all the rest. But now when you actually read the study and think about it, all of a sudden the house of cards begins to fall apart. First, there were only 9 people in the study. That's not a lot of people. If there were 109 people or 1,009 people, I could get more excited. When they said your heart rate didn't go as high, meaning that this broccoli extract clearly must have helped you because it didn't force your heart rate to go up as much, the difference was less than 2%. So without broccoli extract, it on average went up to 187 heart rate, which is really high, actually. These must have been pretty young people. And instead, it only went up to 184. And the time to exhaustion was not 401 minutes. It was 406 minutes, 1% difference. So 9 people, tiny differences. Yes, they were statistically significant. And then it gets worse. The study was funded by the vegetable growers. The authors have a patent that relates to this. Is it possible the broccoli extract would actually improve performance? It's possible. Is it going to hurt you? Not likely. Is it going to help? I don't think so. I don't think this convinces me. And I certainly, and broccoli extract is probably a lot more expensive than buying, a crown or two of broccoli.
And there's not really any motivation or incentive to do large studies.
No, because, again, they can make the claims they want. And to spend $10 million on a study when somebody else can make broccoli extract the next day, the numbers don't work. This is where, and I'm not a big government person, but this is where the government can help. They can fund some of these studies. And as we'll get to, they have funded some of these studies. And I've spoken to the military, our military, and said, you've got a ready laboratory of these aren't N of 1, but you have boot camp that you run every month or two that you start a new boot camp. So have some people drink water before they go on their long runs. Have some people drink Gatorade. Have some people try broccoli extract. You'll know the answer. And you've got, you got lab rats for recruits. But I don't think I convinced them yet to do this.
The point here is we have to be careful when we read studies to see if they support what they say as we're consuming things, not just because of the potential benefit might not be there. Likely it's not going to hurt us, but it's still a serious cost. So what evidence supports supplements?
Supports or doesn't. So let's just walk through some of the common ones and what we do and perhaps what we don't know. Now, there's a famous adage in kind of the evidence world, which is the absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. Well, what does that mean? It means that evidence of absence means I've done a good study and it doesn't work. Absence of evidence is what it sounds like. I don't have a good study to tell me the answer. And so you have to kind of separate, well, has it been tested well and shown not to work? Or frankly, the study hasn't been done, but it still could be really helpful. So let's tease that apart as we get to some real stuff. I've mentioned this before, I'll mention it again. Examine.com is a great starting point to look at nutritional supplements, whether it's melatonin, whether it's, vitamin C, that's a good place to start. They do a summary of things, and then they'll list the actual studies, and you can, pour through them if you wish. So let's start with what up until maybe 5-10 years ago was probably the most popular supplement that people got excited about. Omega-3s. Now they're antioxidants. They're going to go after that really bad free radical stuff. And the thought was that these could prevent heart disease and cancer. Now, what was the theory behind this? Well, they looked around the world and found that people who eat fish live longer. Okay, fish has omega-3s, like anchovies and salmon and sardines and tuna. If eating fish is good, taking the extract out of the fish has got to be even better because it'll be more powerful. But when you actually did the clinical trials, and there were 98 studies on this topic. So it's not like, oh, there was one, study done in Ethiopia. There's 98 studies. They showed that there were no reductions in heart attacks, cardiac death, and the enthusiasm for omega-3s, at least in the scientific community, has fallen by the wayside. That doesn't mean people don't take them. That doesn't mean there aren't functional health doctors that are excited about it. But when you look at the evidence, it's really hard to say they help anybody. Eating fish, perhaps, but it may not be the omega-3s in the fish that are what are helped. So that's an important kind of example.
The reason I think we are talking about this when it comes to the energy pillar is we only have so much money, obviously, time and energy. And this is part of the discussion to make sure we use those precious resources as best we can. And this is not saying that supplements are definitely an out. I think paints a clearer picture for us to make those decisions.
I think it's right. And I think there is a hidden risk here. I have a lot of folks in my personal circle who take supplements in lieu of what is traditional proven therapy. So I got a bunch of people with elevated cholesterols, and they're on, you name it, turmeric, omega-3s, whatever. And they're like, no, I don't believe in this statin stuff. It doesn't really help. And it has side effects. And I'm going down this route. That works for people that have, osteoporosis issues. You hear this over and over and over again. That's probably my bigger worry. If you want to spend $1,000 or $2,000 a year, go have fun, do it. But when you avoid the mainstream approaches to these problems because it sounds like a great alternative, that's when I get worried.
That's your point. So do we want to highlight one other study and then we can go out about what to do about this?
Sure. Vitamins and minerals are, again, very, very, very popular. And there was a summary recently that looked at, again, here we have 84 clinical trials, and they looked at vitamin D, beta carotene, which was the bee's knees for a while, vitamin E. They had really no benefit. And in some cases, actually increased risk. And the one thing that actually might suggest it could work was just your boring multivitamin. Now, it was a small benefit in cancer reduction. I don't know, how much to make out of it. But here's another kind of going down the path of, we love vitamin and mineral supplements, but when you look at the evidence, it doesn't pan out.
Let's talk about multivitamins, because we mentioned it once or twice. A daily multivitamin. It's a huge industry. It seems like a good practice, your one a days or whatever. Have you examined any of the evidence around multivitamins, or are there studies on that?
The multivitamin concept presupposes you're not getting enough of what is indicated on a daily basis. So this sort of fills in the cracks. Most people, get all the vitamins they need, and the requirements that are listed under the recommended daily allowances are pretty small. So, a multivitamin which just has that minimum amount, is not going to hurt you. I take a multivitamin just because it's 10 cents a day. It's easy to do. And, I have weird diets sometimes, and, I may try intermittent fasting. So I'm not going to get as many times to have broccoli during the day. And I figured, okay, do I think it's absolutely proven that it works? No. Is it cheap and isn't going to hurt me? Yes. So I take them. So that's one that I actually do.
Since we are all on the journey to aging and we want to age as well as we can, any thoughts on cognitive decline and supplements?
People worry probably more about cognitive decline than they worry about dropping dead. I mean, we were all very frightened of kind of the specter of Alzheimer's, being in a nursing home, not recognizing friends. That's just an awful experience. So anything that kind of leans in the direction of, can I do something? Agency here is really critical. I saw my sister deteriorate, and I'll do anything. And I've heard these dietary things could help. So there was a lot of excitement around two different diets, the Mediterranean diet, which people know about, and the DASH diet, which was sort of invented for high blood pressure folks. But they're all pretty similar in terms of, whole grains, leafy vegetables. And particularly in this study, they included nuts and beans and berries, things that were purported to help you with cognitive issues. And so they did this very large study. It was a 3-year study, lots of people. They measured cognitive ability over time. And they even looked at MRI scans to see what was going on in the brain. Bottom line is, there were no benefits for cognitive decline. And they didn't measure, cancer and other things. This is what they focused on. Now, is this a supplement study? No. But if this study, where you eat beans and berries and nuts and leafy vegetables, didn't help people, then an extract of leafy vegetables, nuts, beans, and berries is probably not likely to be that beneficial. Meaning, show me the money, show me a study that shows the extract works, when this whole food approach, which everybody says whole food approaches are better, didn't work.
I remember the Mind Diet. I remember reading that book. When you think of a study like that, and I think of 3 years, and I go back to, like, Peter Thiel talks about the compounding of habits. 3 years seems like a very short time in the scheme of things to see if eating, say, a Mediterranean or whole food diet has an impact, just as a layman.
Well, they didn't choose 3 years between the ages of 21 and 24, where you wouldn't expect much decline at all. These were people who were older, where you would anticipate there could be some decline in at least, some of the people, and you randomize them. And so, yes, this is not a study of people starting at the age of 30, following this set of diets, which are pretty, hard to follow, for 40 years and saying, no, didn't help. But again, I'm a show me person. If this didn't work, the burden of proof is on you to come up with some evidence that longer would have made a difference. Now, that longer might be doing a study in dogs or chimpanzees, where you say, for 2 years in a dog, there were no benefits, but in 8 years in a dog, there were benefits. So you need something to tell me that this study doesn't answer the question. And I haven't found that.
Okay, so are there supplements that you like?
Yeah, there are. I mean, I'm not a complete nihilist. So I'm a physician. So I prescribe stuff. So if you have a known deficiency, and, not like, oh yeah, my doctor thinks my vitamin D levels are low. People who have Crohn's disease or real gastric problems or intestinal problems, their bodies don't absorb certain things. By all means, if it's been demonstrated that that is low, a supplement is absolutely important. But that's not a routine blood test that says your calcium is this or your B12 is that. I absolutely support it when it's demonstrable that you have a condition that makes it low. Now, I differentiate from an excitement standpoint, supplements you have to take your whole life versus ones that treat a particular acute problem. If I say to you, you should take calcium, magnesium, and omega-3s for your whole life, and you won't really know if it works until 40 years later, I don't get excited unless there's evidence that supports it. On the other hand, if you have bowel irregularity and you add psyllium to your diet, Metamucil, and it changes it, well, that's your N of 1 study. You've done it. It works. If you're trying to build muscle or maintain muscle and you have protein supplements and you actually can show my strength is improving, whatever, love it. I think it's fantastic. And as we've talked before, caffeine is a supplement. It's a drug, it's a supplement. It does improve exercise performance. But those are discrete, short-term, accessible supplements, as opposed to just trust me, 30 years of this will work. Kevin Lyle's one of our coaches, is on certain supplements, and he, had certain things that were low or high in his blood. And he said to me earlier today, he sent me a message that if his repeat blood tests while taking a whole raft of supplements that were supposed to help, if it didn't improve his blood values, he was going to stop them. I think that's a perfect way to go about it. It's your N of 1 trial. If the turmeric doesn't affect your cholesterol, then don't worry about having a lot of turmeric or whatever it is that you think is going to solve the problem.
I was thinking of this the other day, Bobby, in terms of this N of 1 study that you always talk about. Just try it and see if you feel different. Would you agree that, I'll use my brother-in-law as an example, is he started taking athletic greens and, we meet every week, and about a month or two later, it's like, it's really, my belly feels better. I don't feel as bloated. Whether it's placebo or not, he is connecting the dots, rightly or wrongly, to, hey, I'm taking athletic greens and I feel better. That can still be a win as long as you understand that it's not necessarily scientifically based. Would you agree?
Yes, I would do a couple things. One is I would ask him after 6 months and say, that boost in feeling, is it still there? He may well say, nah, not so much, but I'm still taking the athletic greens anyways because I like the idea. Then he should try stopping the athletic greens for a period of time. The ideal way, and I don't remember how athletic greens is it a packet? Is it a pill? What is it?
It's a powder that you mix. But it's like $88 a month, so it's not inexpensive.
So ideally what I would do is, the simple thing is just stop it and see what happens. The one that's a little more difficult is, have your wife make your smoothie in the morning and add, something that kind of tastes like an athletic green thing, but not athletic greens, and see if it makes a difference. That would be the best way to do it.
So what's our take-home message here?
Nutritional supplements are very popular. And as you said, a lot of money can be spent on them. There's a good reason people want to do it. It gives them a sense that they have some control over their health. But there's not a lot of evidence that any of these things work for these long-term uses. They're pretty safe. And it really just comes down to the risk that you think you assume by taking these, the benefit you hope or you think will happen, and the cost, and make your own decision. I mentioned earlier, I take multivitamins. Do they absolutely work? No, but who knows? I've recently tried something that's popular in sort of the strength community, NMN. People may have heard of NAD and various other things. Anyhow, the evidence is interesting, perhaps promising. And for me, I don't yet know whether they work or not. And I'm like giving it a 6-month trial and we'll see what happens. And if I feel like it doesn't help, then I won't do it. It doesn't seem to be any harm.
So your N1 study is, okay, the risk of the actual material is negligible, if any. There's this potential benefit, and for whatever you're paying for it, it's worth trying.
Exactly.
Essentially is.
Exactly. And I'll make a decision based on whether I think it has helped or it hasn't helped. And, I'll either continue it or I'll stop it.
I love these discussions because they help us be intentional about spending our time and our resources on building energy and make us better consumers. So thanks as always, Bobby.
Oh, you're so welcome.